There we go. I like the American sort of automated robot voice that gives. Yeah, so in Northern Ireland, there is a patchwork quilt of social security, um, means tested benefits being probably the largest constituents part of that. Contributory benefits being predicated on national insurance. Some are non-contributory and some are non-means tested. And we'll be having a look at each throughout this presentation. But there are some general principles that as a cross-border group we should establish from the beginning. The first of which is if you're a British or Irish citizen residing or working in the other state, you're subject to only one state's social security legislation at a time. So you can access your entitlements from whichever state you're subject to that legislation for, regardless of where you're living. I know for many of you that won't be news, but I think it's always good to look at those principles. And of course, we have something called the Common Travel Area, where we pay into one state's social security at a time, where we're entitled to that, and when in the other state, entitled to enjoy the same social security rights as citizens of that state. And of course, over the years, there was so much uncertainty about that as we hurtled towards, in the United Kingdom, an exit from the European Union. And of course, there is a bit of a division in terms of time, pre and post Brexit. Pre 31st of December 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago now. Pre then, if you were an Irish, British, or European Union citizen, and you moved across the border or started a cross-border job by New Year's Eve, December 20, then the withdrawal agreement applies to you, and the EU rules that were in place continue to apply. So our migrant workers, our frontier workers, and our retired workers enjoyed a continuance of their entitlement. But of course, there was a quite straightforward line with the exit. And post that, we now have a treaty between Irish and British citizens that the ethos behind the treaty is that workers will continue to pay into one social security scheme at a time, and some benefits are exportable and some are not. By exportable, we mean paid in one or the other. And what I'm going to do is take you through those concepts and take you through those benefits that have full coverage, but also those benefits that might have competent state issues, and show you where those can be affected and what we can do about those, and where you can get some further reading on those. The ones that we'll focus on that have full coverage that can be brought across are sickness benefits, maternity allowances, pensions, and child-based benefits. So things like attendance allowance, which is a disability benefit, bereavement benefits, carers, everything that you see on your screen there has full coverage from the treaty. And we'll look at the uniqueness of each as we get a chance throughout this session. It's important, though, to understand that there are some benefits that do not have very fluid relationships with the treaty, benefits that can only be paid in the state in which the claimant is resident and can't be exported to another country. So the common things that we have problems with are income-related job seeking and sickness benefits, pension credit, and the mobility aspect of our disability benefits. But we'll look at all of that in turn. But what I would like to recommend to you very warmly and very enthusiastically is a constantly updated practice guide from our colleagues in the Law Centre. I hope this link is something that you've all seen. I find it excellent. It's a continually Amazing resource. It's updated regularly. Last updated just in the springtime, and it articulates in greater detail, perhaps, than we have in the time that we have, exactly where one should focus on not only competent state rules, but EU coordination rules, and we'll be referring to bits of it through today, and it really is an excellent publication. But what I intend to do is just take you on a whistle-stop tour through our benefit system and then link back to some of the principles that we've covered, essentially. And we'll also have a chance to look not only at the treaty aspect of all of these, but the right to reside for EU nationals aspect of all of those as we go through the session. And how, if we're not relying on treaty rights, we're looking beyond that to Europe, and how there is, if you like, a sort of I would describe it as a traffic light color-coded scheme of what is helpful to benefit entitlement in the UK, depending on who you are. In essence, workers or retained workers or those with rights to reside tend to find a very smooth transition to benefits, whereas family members of the above have some questions, and other people perhaps have limitations or indeed complete and utter barriers to benefit entitlement. But we'll look at those as we look at each benefit and try and line that up for you in a way that you can understand, along with the overall criteria for each of those. And what we're going to do is start with universal credit, which for many seems a complicated or intimidating piece of subject matter, and you could probably talk about universal credit for about 3 days, but I want to give you a flavour of it as concisely as possible. It gets rid of much of our patchwork quilt. It takes most of our means-tested and non-taxable benefits that are designed to top up income, either from no income or from some income, and puts them in one place. So if you've ever considered the Northern Ireland security system and scratched your head at the idea of what's the difference between income support and job seekers allowance, what on earth is sickness benefit, what are the roles of working and child tax credit, and how does someone get help with their rent, it takes all of those concepts and puts them into one single benefit. It is a payment for lone parents. It is a payment for job seekers. It is a payment for people unable to work due to sickness. It is a payment for people topping up a low or moderate working income. It is a straightforward payment to parents for children. And it covers rent in both the private rental sector and social sector. So it is the taking of our old, if you like, or legacy means-tested benefit system and the placing of it in one singular benefit department. But it continues to have elements that cover all of the things that the likes of income support would have had, or job seekers, or tax credits, or sickness benefits. But it just pays those in layers. If you can imagine different layers being added depending on how many circumstances that you have that give rise to entitlement, it does precisely that. But it makes that all one place, one payment, and essentially awards a household budget. And whilst that household budget has some set figures, amounts that they're willing to pay for each set of circumstances every month, it's entirely predicated on how much money you bring into that calculation. So it's means tested. And how it is means tested depends on what you do. If you are working, universally, it will only count 55% of your income, but it may also allow you certain income disregards that they call work allowances. If you are not working and obtaining income from other benefits or pensions, it simply counts those pound for pound. What we are talking about here is a top up, an income standard based on an amount for adults, children, sick children, um, working age adults' ability to work, a boost if you're a carer, help towards childcare costs, and help with your rent. Bolt on those different layers of possible entitlement, subtract your income, or however they treat your income if you're working, and they simply pay the difference as a top up. So it is borrowing bits of our old tax credit system. It's borrowing bits of job seekers allowance and income support, and just the general principle of how means tested benefits are assessed in the UK. So there are some new ideas and there are some very old ideas. But the concept overall is to provide a household budget in a multi-layered fashion designed to pay people different elements depending on their circumstances. So if I walk into that as a single job seeker, I'll only get perhaps 1 to 2 elements, such as my standard allowance for an adult and help with housing costs. Whereas if I happen to have children, we'll add that to that. If I happen to be a carer, perhaps we'll add that to that. Or if I'm working and need help with my childcare costs, we'll add it all together. So it's an amalgamation of our system put into one place. Assessed monthly in terms of my financial capability, what I bring to the equation, but paid by default twice in the month. And that's where it gets very unique, because most benefits in the North, particularly when it comes to income related benefits, are usually assessed on a weekly or fortnightly basis. The main thing to understand about universal credit is that it is a UK-based benefit and it is for residents of the United Kingdom. One of the other most significant things to understand is that it is essentially a benefit that is assessed and reassessed and looked at every month rather than annually or on some sort of renewal cycle. Unlike things like tax credit that require you to make an annual declaration, there's a singular means test, and it is reliant entirely on a claimant advising or updating on circumstances. Universal credit works in an entirely different fashion. If you're working, it knows what your entitlement is and actually knows what's in your pay slip before you do, because your employer reports it to HMRC.
Okay, I found this on the web for if you're working knows what you're entitled is in your payslip before you do. Check it out.
Not today, Siri. No, thank you. That's my iPad speaking to me. Sinister. Yeah, it knows what you're earning and what's in your payslip before you do. And the whole fashion and aim behind it essentially is to get you the right amount of benefit paid, particularly if you have a variable income, every single month. What that means is it's assessed monthly and then paid in arrears. So everyone who makes an application for it will wait around 5 weeks before they receive it. And in that 4 to 5 weeks, in that calendar monthly period, it's tracking their earnings in real time, making a calculation decision towards the end of the cycle, and making a payment based on that, and then resets and does the same every single month. The theory behind that is that it rules out the possibility of overpayment and underpayment.
Okay, I found this on the web first that rules out the possibility.
I'm going to throw this out the door. So rather than have things like job seekers allowance or income support or tax credits for fresh claims, for new applications to benefit. Universal credit now replaces all of those things. So there is less for you to look at in terms of subject matter there. Any questions on that before I continue?
Ryan, can I just jump in? Just to let everyone know, there is a page on Border People, I'll share the link with you, about the cross-border aspect of this for cross-border workers who are living in the south now, working in the north. And there's a few links and stuff, and we'll certainly, you know, that page will grow. And just the comment about the, Ryan, you made about the almost real-time reporting that it takes in, you know, that bit's always complicated for cross-border workers who declare their income annually. And I think, Aisling, sorry to call on you there, but I think you had mentioned at a previous meeting about a workaround for that annual assessment, that there was a monthly return that could be done or something like that for cross-border workers. Am I right? Or maybe it was somebody else?
No, I don't know, Anne-Marie. It's just like, as Ryan was saying, because your income's assessed monthly, self-employed people just submit their income and expenses monthly online through their journal.
Through their journal. So and that would be the same for somebody who's employed, not self-employed.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Because that was the bit we were worried about with the cross-border workers just declaring annually. You know, at the end of the year. So look, I'll mute again, but I'll share that link with you.
No, not at all. It's really interesting, and it also, yeah, it's important to speak about, you know, not just people perhaps who are working through a pay-as-you-earn taxation employment system, but yeah, for sure, self-employment. Universal credit is mostly served online, and what that gives rise to is this very unique thing called the journal, and it allows the upload or indeed download or transfer of documents. And with that in mind, it gives an opportunity for self-employed people to put their cash in and out and allowable expenses in every month as part of that income assessment. But it also allows people who don't fit neatly into the British PAYE scheme to upload similar documentation every month, so that their entitlement can be determined. And that's where cross-border workers come into this. So if financial information can be uploaded by the individual live in real time during what's called their assessment period, Universal Credit should be able to do an accurate assessment of income there each month without problems. I wouldn't expect them to have any problem with that. And that sort of digital service, that's one of the main sort of benefits we feel of that digital service. There are a lot of drawbacks with the digital service for those who don't feel entirely capable of using it, but it does provide that transfer of documentation. So it is a workaround to an extent. Those of you, the practitioners we have there, are you seeing any difficulties with that? Or Universal Credit, by and large, able to take that financial information monthly?
I personally haven't had any feedback from cross-border workers about any issues with submitting figures, Ryan. So yeah,
we're hoping that no news is good news in that respect.
Yeah, on that front, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Important to also say that for new cross-border workers, particularly those who find themselves going on to Universal Credit, depending on what their arrangements are and when they'll next receive a salary payment, there is a couple of options available for new claims in terms of help to bridge the gap, if you like, financially between claim and initial payment. We can all see the wisdom in an assessment period, because what it does essentially is it ensures, when it works properly, that someone gets the right amount of benefit each month based on what their income is. And it rules out problems that we've always faced in tax credits with variable income. It's a good thing in a way, but what it does then obviously is creates a lag in your first month, where it's assessing you in real time and establishing the payment in arrears culture so that it can pay you each month thereafter. And what that means is, much like going into employment in years gone past, you might end up sort of, if you like, experiencing what's a lying month in benefit entitlement. And what that means for many people, particularly if they're on a modest or very low income or less, they're worried about what they can do in the interim. Universal Credit offers an advance, which essentially advances you an estimated entitlement of your first full payment, potentially of up to 100% of what you're entitled to, which is then repayable over the course of 12 months. But we also have other options depending on your status here, most particularly a contingency fund payment, which came and was financed as part of our welfare reform mitigations, which allows a payment to be made as a grant and not a loan. The difficulty with that is it's not administered by Universal Credit. So individual Universal Credit operators may not communicate that because it isn't normally part of their business. They may communicate information on an advance, but not a grant, because the grant is made available through our discretionary support scheme. So I would always suggest linking with colleagues here in the north, and we can help smooth passage towards a grant for those that are entitled, rather than an advance. Because my worry about the advance is we'll have people who will borrow and then not see their true rate of entitlement until month 13, because they're repaying a loan that allows them a small amount of money whilst they're waiting on benefit, where a grant is possible for some. And I think there's been confusion in the past about the idea of advances versus the contingency fund payment, because prior to, I think if memory serves, 2019, one had to apply for an advance first, receive a small amount, and then get a grant. But now you're able to go straight to a grant, because of changes to our legislation just prior to pandemic. So important to look at that in terms of, if you like, common sense access to benefits and what someone can do in the meantime. If there's no salary coming in or no other money coming in, there is the potential for help there. And we'll look a little later in this presentation as to what our discretionary support service is and how they can be contacted. But certainly any of our member organizations in the north can help. The contingency fund payment can be done as a telephone application or indeed online, but requires you, of course, to first of all establish your claim to Universal Credit. So the sequence of events is often someone makes their claim online to Universal Credit, gets their confirmation of that, and then approaches our service about grant funding. But we know, much to our disappointment, that many people are offered an advance by Universal Credit as part of their initial entitlement conversation, and it's hard to judge people when offered an advance. They will often take it if worried about the next 4 to 5 weeks, but there is a better way, and it is a grant rather than a loan. Any questions on any of that, folks? Just going to check the chat box. Oh, that's that link. Brilliant. And I was going to sort of swoop round at the end, Anne-Marie, and go back over cross-border issues with each of these in turn, because there are some to think about as well. But that link is excellent, and I have to say I use it myself all the time. in training, because it's a very neat and concise way of explaining what is a very complex thing in just one page. So it's a great resource. My slides have just crashed. Apologies. Important though to mention that there are still some, if you like, legacy means tested benefits available in Northern Ireland that are not universal credit. Universal credit replaces, if you like, legacy means tested benefits that aren't predicated on national insurance contributions. We still have in the North contributions-based benefits for people who find themselves suddenly unemployed or suddenly unwell and unable to work. In other words, we still have job seekers allowance, and we still have what we would call ESA, or employment support allowance, available to those who have national insurance or equivalent contributions. And with the dawning of universal credit, I feel like this has been forgotten by benefit administration here in the North. And we'll look at each in turn. And they have the wonderful euphemistic name of New Style. So we have New Style Job Seekers Allowance and New Style Employment and Support Allowance. Strange terminology, New Style, but essentially what it means is reformed or less generous when you actually look at what it is. No one has given them a style update. They are not looking at their best here. All they are is a contemporary version, a limited version of contributions-based benefits, often for a small amount of time to help people. Let's look at Job Seekers Allowance and what that actually is. It's not means tested. That means that in most circumstances, it's the entitlement that someone has, provided they've paid into a system to allow them to get it. So New Style Job Seekers Allowance is the modern equivalent of contribution-based Job Seekers Allowance. It's available to those who have paid or have been treated as paid 26 weeks of our class 1 or 2 national insurance contributions within one of the 2 last tax years preceding their claim, or those who can show equivalence of that. So if you've paid into the system or can be treated as paying into the system, you will receive, provided you're of working age and fit and well to work, you will receive potential entitlement, provided you become a job seeker, sign on, and carry out labour market activity. And if that's the case, for 6 months, you will receive a very modest amount of Job Seekers Allowance. It's about £75 a week. And even those who are in relationships and their partner is working full-time, not receiving benefits, etc., will receive that money. It's essentially a dividend paid to those who have paid into a system, been treated as paid into a system, or have paid into an equivalent system and have the right to claim that up here. But alongside that claim will come significant labour market activity, work-related activity, sign on, and of course placement on mandatory schemes if directed by work coaches. So it's like the old job seekers, but for 6 months based on contributions, and it still exists. Similarly, we have the same idea and the same concept, not for job seekers, but for those who have found themselves out of employment due to illness. What's called New Style Employment and Support Allowance, which again is contributory and a taxable source of income for HMRC, but not means tested. and again works on the same contribution equivalent or credited aspect. So if one has paid into the system during the previous couple of years, or is treated as doing so, or into an equivalent system, they can themselves receive, if they're of working age, a very small amount of benefit, provided not only they meet the contribution criteria for this one, but because it is a sickness benefit, successfully come through a medical assessment to justify that. And at that medical assessment, you'll find yourself with a healthcare professional making a decision whether or not this benefit is for you entirely. And if not, you'll be pointed towards job seekers allowance. Or if you're, for want of a better term, a little bit sick or a lot sick, not to be flippant, just to be illustrative. And if you're a little bit sick, they put you in something called the work-related activity group, or a lot sick, the support group. If you find yourself in the work-related activity group, you will only receive payments for 12 months. In the support group, there is no time limit. Your entitlement is open-ended. In the support group, you will be left alone to receive your payment and not expected to do anything for it, other than to update them on changes of circumstances or attend further medicals. If you're in the work group, you might find yourself with a part-time work or work-related activity expectation, and in any event, your application will be limited to 12 months. So what that means is that not all individuals should be claiming universal credit. Some, if they have the relevant national insurance or equivalent contributions, should be claiming job seekers or ESA. But it really depends not only on their own circumstances, but perhaps what their partner's circumstances are, if they have one, what their housing scenario is. And that's where our advice sector here in the north will help you make better off calculations in that respect, because there are some considerations to be had there. Contributions benefits are often overlooked, though, much to our frustration, because individual interpretation of those tends to vary, and people seem to think that universal credit is the be all and end all whenever there still is this system in place. Any questions on those?
Ryan. Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, Ryan, Aidan
Good
Gordon
morning.
from Citizens Information Service. Morning. Hiya, Ryan. This is really interesting. Can I ask you just two quick questions, probably quite obvious and stupid sounding questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway.
Never any such thing. Go ahead.
The qualifying contribution years, can it be the year in which you make the claim? So let's say somebody had 26 weeks contributions in, from the 1st of January and, was claiming on week 27, or does it literally have to be the previous tax year altogether or the one before that?
You mean if they've been making substantial contributions and have managed that equivalent quite suddenly rather than over the course of...
Yeah, if you pay 26 class 1 or 2 in the year which you subsequently make the claim, so let's say you become unemployed in week 27 of the same year, or are they going to look at the contributions the previous year and hopefully you have them?
The standard is one of the 2 last tax years.
Yeah, but would that include the year in which you're making the claim?
Yes, up to and including.
Right. Brilliant. And the other
that would be a better way
was,
of saying that rather than proceeding. Actually, that's something for me to change on that slide.
No, the reason, the particular reason I asked is that in with DSP in the south, it's what they call the qualifying year is always, generally speaking, 2 years previously, but it can be the previous year in certain circumstances, but not the year in which you're making the claim, if you know what I mean. So it is, that's slightly different.
Absolutely.
But thanks for that. The other thing was, you see in the ESA support group payment, right?
Yes.
If somebody is put into that, and one assumes that somebody's quite ill if they've been put into that and have been determined clinically to be unable to work because of that the particular health situation they have. So they're not required to do any job activity stuff or anything like that. But just on the review front, in your experience, somebody in the support group, are they subject to review on occasion anyway? If, let's say, they have no change of circumstance to notify themselves and things go on for a year or 2 years or whatever, because you said there's no time limit on it, but are they likely to at some point be reviewed anyway?
Increasingly so. Only those where there is absolute, unequivocal medical evidence to suggest that the condition can either never improve or will continue
Right.
to deteriorate. Only
Yeah.
those individuals seem to find themselves without, if you like, medical scrutiny on a sort of a semi-regular basis. But outside of that, we're finding anecdotally and from our network, we're finding that people in the support group tend to find themselves back at assessment every couple of years or so. The
Right.
determining factor
And-
in that tends to be at the assessment themselves. The medical professional doing the exam is asked a question as to, do you think there should be a review in this case? If so, by when?
But you like with ourselves and here with long-term illness or disability payments, it's open to review at any point at the behest of the department. Like they
Absolutely,
technically can
they
review
have
whenever.
inbuilt within the legislation the right, if you like, to carry out regular reviews on cases in any event. And it is, you're right, it is all tightening up across the board where there are any forms of medical assessment, if you like, or interpretation of someone's functional impairment. We are just seeing those awards contract rather than expand in terms of time.
Yeah.
It's happening in disability benefits that are non-means tested too.
Brilliant. That's great, Ryan. Thanks very much.
So we tend to say every couple of years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, good man. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on those?
Ryan, maybe just a comment about the contributions as well, that sometimes people aren't told about combining contributions that have been paid across the border. So it's just something.
Absolutely, and that is really important to go back to. Could take that slide all the way back to Principle B, the idea that you can combine from both sides and then choose, having put those pots together. That's very, very important that you can do that. Yeah. And that doesn't just work for contributions-based benefits, of course, that works for other things like pensions and what have you. You know, that you have this central pot and you can combine and use equivalences. Absolutely. I think we'd love more people to know about that. Okay. Outside of universal credit, which is designed to replace our child tax credit system and provide parents of children additional amounts of benefit or entitlement to benefit, just a reminder that we also have something called child benefit, which is again protected by our treaty and comes with equivalence rules. And child benefit is a modest payment, but a payment nonetheless, for parents of children, based entirely on making a claim and who has the main responsibility for a child, which can get a little difficult in cases where there is shared custody, of course. But we do still have child benefit. It hasn't been subsumed into universal credit. It's still child benefit as it always has been, and it isn't considered as income for other means tested benefits. And it's a relatively straightforward benefit, paid a modest amount, admittedly, to first and eldest child, and then second to subsequent children at a smaller amount. We're talking 20 odd pounds a week. And it It's a strange benefit. It's not means tested, but there are income cutoffs for it depending on whether you're a higher rate taxpayer or whether or not you're sharing sort of into the 40s and 80,000 pounds per annum. But most of us are not dealing with clients who are lucky enough to be able to say that, and increasingly we're dealing with clients who wouldn't have anywhere next nor near that sum of money coming in. We wish they had. And child benefit is on our list of exportable benefits cross-border. Important to remember that. So we've looked a lot at, if you like, means tested and income replacement benefits. We've looked at top up of income benefits for those in work and those out of work. But in the UK and Northern Ireland, we have a substantial amount of benefits for those who are disabled on a non-means tested benefit basis, and those who are carers on a semi-means tested benefit basis, which I'd like to introduce you to. And there are lots of equivalences with benefits south of the border as well. But there are some important distinctions to be made because there are layers to disability benefit entitlement that do not look the same north and south. In particular, we're going to start with personal independence payments, which for those of you who have ever done anything on the system up here in the past and recognized disability living allowance, personal independence payments, or PIP, are the replacement for DLA. It is a non-means tested disability benefit for working age adults. And curiously, we determine adult entitlement for this benefit at 16 and up to state pension age. It's not means tested, it's not taxable, and neither is it predicated on national insurance contributions. It will not negatively impact on other means tested benefits. In fact, it often helps. And it does not count as income if anyone is accessing health and social care here in the north. It considers functionality. That's its main job. It looks at whether people have daily living and or mobility challenges, and it makes a payment on the basis of those. For people who have suffered from health conditions for at least 3 months and likely to do so for the next 9 months. So it's not for short-term conditions, it's for longer-term conditions that people will face. For those who don't have treaty rights or European rights, it does have very harsh residence and habitual residence tests 2 out of 3 years. But of course, our clients will be able to enjoy treaty rights and of course European rights as well. But for those outside of that network, it has extremely harsh residence 2 out of 3 years, which by comparison with its older relative DLA had a 6 out of 12 month standard. So it's very hostile for those outside of the common travel area and outside of Europe in terms of waiting time, unless exempted by law. We have refugees from Syria who were exempted from this, but outside of that, we have many people coming to the UK for legitimate reasons, unable to claim this benefit for 2 years, essentially, even though they're absolutely entitled to it by virtue of their disability and their problems with functionality. But what it does is it pays money for challenges with daily living, or in other words, personal care, or with getting around. And it makes no distinction between physical health and mental ill health. It's all very much the same. If either of those things challenge your functionality, you might receive an award. Daily living is the kind of things that you would expect one to do each day, the things that perhaps some of us all take for granted and that others find extremely challenging. Mobility is a little bit more self-explanatory. And what it does is it sends you to a medical assessment carried out by a third-party private sector operator. We're very keen on those in the United Kingdom, except for in Scotland, where they're starting to run them out of town. And it makes a decision on a points basis as to whether someone's entitled to it. It doesn't look at finance, it doesn't look at anything other than the functionality and test for benefit, and then awards accordingly. And it will award either daily living and or mobility. However, we have a problem with this. Our treaty coverage here will only allow exportability for daily living and not for mobility. And the reason for that is when they were drafting up the treaty, they were of course looking at equivalence, and there isn't something for them to pin equivalence to here. So the mobility aspect benefits don't sit very well in terms of our treaty scenario. And again, in our experience, when awards of this are made, they tend to be kept on a very tight timescale, unless there is very sufficient justification for a long-term or indefinite version of this award. Because it's multi-layered, because there are different rates of it, particularly those who are on the standard rate often find themselves being renewed or reviewed occasionally, but perhaps for positive reasons, so they can check to see if they're entitled to the higher amounts if it's a condition that does deteriorate. But rather frustratingly, we do find lots of people on the highest rates of both who have conditions that will not be reasonably expected to improve, but yet they find themselves still being assessed every 2 years or so. There does appear to be a culture now in the provision of these benefits of really just doubling down on assessment quite often. And what that means is people are never really done filling in forms and never really done going to medical assessments. Only in the minority of cases do we see people receiving these things long-term or indefinitely. Unlike DLA, which quite often recognized indefinite awards. And not only is this a cash benefit in Northern Ireland, in that you will receive these amounts weekly if you're awarded them, in terms of mobility for those that are here,
Okay, folks, is it just me or is Ryan froze?
Not just me. All right, sorry. I was just about to say the same thing.
I
Obviously,
thought he
Ryan's
was
gone,
just
has
holding his breath. I was getting worried there.
Okay, hang on.
he? He's gone offline, I think.
Yeah. Look, just to comment just on this issue with PIP, you know, it's something that we've talked about many times before. This is really complicated. So if somebody comes to you considering a cross-border job, he's gone altogether. If somebody does come to you considering a cross-border job, you know, what are the knock-on effects? The knock-on effects could be DLA and PIP entitlement, because as Ryan was mentioning there, it is linked in with the coordination rules. It can have knock-on effects for people, dependents as well, who have DLA. If there's no other income earned in the house. This is a really complicated one, so just keep a wee eye. Anyone who asks about implications of cross-border working, DLA and PIP, that care component is definitely at risk for that worker and potentially their dependents, so you can keep an eye. Welcome back, Ryan. Oh, hang on. You're muted there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know that's the first that's happened to me?
The weather. Blame the weather.
Honestly, that is genuinely. I've been saying it all along. So we've been sort of confined to Zoom since roughly St. Patrick's Day 2020, and I've yet to have an internet crash.
If there's any consolation, Ryan, my connection died just prior to yours. I'm just back on again
There
as
you
well.
go.
So it's something north of the border, clearly.
Oh,
But
it's
you're down in
Surrey, Ryan.
Fermanagh, Jackie. You know, we're apparently we're still there's bits of internet there that we can't quite get to you yet, but we'll get there. We'll get those cables across the lock eventually to you.
Cheers, thanks for that.
Send some of them down to County Monaghan as well, please.
I'll certainly do my best. I'll do my best. Where are we running them? Are we running them from this way or the other? Yeah,
Well, around here they're not running anyway.
that's true. Do you know what? There's vast benefits sometimes to there being no internet in certain parts of the world. I spent about a
Occasionally.
week. I spent about a week in a cottage just outside of Castleblaney last summer with no internet, and it was one of the greatest weeks of my life because nobody could get the hold of me. So, good for leisure, not so good for work.
Yeah, I was going to say that's great when you're on holidays, but for those of us who live in that area, not so good.
Not so good. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Any more questions? No, apologies for dropping out there. Any more questions in relation to that aspect of PIP entitlement? Just it does need a careful approach. That is important to say.
I just wanted to, this is not really a question, it's just Manus, I think, I a couple of cross-border claims I was assisting with, and I think it was Manus forwarded me a very good guide to how the points are awarded as regards each thing of functionality in relation to a PIP claim. And I think there's also a very good Citizens Advice UK have a very good guide to it as well. So because it's a very complicated form and there's an awful lot of information to be given about, you know, your functionality, your ability to cook meals, all of that sort of stuff. So it's quite an intense form. So any guide that we can use to assist clients that we're assisting to complete it as fully and as purposefully as possible, I think is well worth having a look at. So because obviously they're not forms that we would be overly familiar with. Obviously we would be familiar with disability allowance and invalidity pensions contribute anyway, particularly disability allowance forms that asks some similar questions in a very different way. But so that the how the points are awarded section by section is, to me, was very interesting, I have to say. So it's I would recommend any of my colleagues in the south, if you're dealing with cross-border claims for PIP, to have a look at it. It's well worth a look at.
I actually have something that I'll send on to Anne-Marie for forwarding that I'm quite keen on as well. It's a form filling guide that I compiled recently for a couple of our training course around the idea of better PIP form filling, and it focuses not just on the points, but there's actually a secret test for the benefit that's going on behind the points, what's called our reliability regulations, and they're all coming at it from the perspective of whether or not you can do something safely, or whether or not you can do something repeatedly or in a reasonable period of time. And they're actually, if you like, the coded secret language beneath all of this. And the form doesn't actually express that very well. It doesn't give people the opportunity to express that very well. You know, we have a yes, no, and sometimes on the form, and that actually, the crucial point of entitlement is majority. And the form's not very well written to the entitlement regulations. And actually, I produced a guide on that so that people could better consider the strongest possible application based on what the real entitlement criteria is. The points entitlement is there for assessment, but underneath that, decision makers are looking at frequency, duration, whether or not something's safe or whether someone can do it repeatedly. And I actually don't think the forum does a great job of allowing people to express that. And if they can't express it
it
at
doesn't, no.
application, they find it hard to express at assessment. And we have then awful decision making as a result of that. So I'll put that together and send that round actually, because you might find it useful in conjunction with those other excellent publications.
That would
Ryan,
be really
thanks
useful,
so
Ryan.
much.
I'd love to see that. Yeah, definitely.
Ryan, thanks a million. I suppose for the purpose of this group, we'd be very conscious, just part of the project now, not can't speak for other organisations, but just for the project's point of view, the point of this group is that the advisors and information providers on the other side of the border would be aware, but they wouldn't actually be completing those forms, that they
Sure.
would be signposting on to the people that they have shared with in this group and with others,
Yeah, absolutely.
other colleagues. So I think having access to that document would be very good as information based, but it's something we wouldn't push for, I suppose, on behalf of the project. It's more an awareness raising rather than getting into the nitty gritty. And certainly, it's always really important and handy to know even the calculations and things like that behind other benefits like universal credit and whatever else. But again, there's an awful lot of signposting out to colleagues across the border that typically does happen. Sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all. The broad shape of it is what we're after. Absolutely. So the next thing we're going to look at is one of the last forms of disability living allowance that we've been left with, and it's children's disability living allowance. It still exists. There is no personal independence payment for children because children are not expected to be personally independent. So we still have disability living allowance for children. It is payable to parents. It is not means tested, nor contributory, nor taxable. And again, doesn't impact benefits negatively, nor count, if you like, as money in terms of health and social care assessments. And it's an extremely important source of funding for parents who have children with substantial illness. And again, it has two sides, if you like, to the house. It has care and it has mobility. But it has a little bit more in terms of entitlement layers, whereas PEP was simplified and stripped to, there are two rates in each side of the house. Here we have much more, recognizing the complexity of the care that we must provide to children. But in particular, when it comes to our sort of cross-border scenario, focusing on the care aspect of things. And what is important to distinguish, without getting into too much detail, is a straightforward test called the children's test. We have to differentiate between adult and child benefits when it comes to disability, because so many of the daily living tasks that we're talking about are not things that young children could do successfully or should be expected to do by virtue of their age. So the test is that the child's needs must be substantially in excess of the normal requirements of a child of the same age who isn't dealing with physical or mental ill health problems restricting those. In other words, it's not about the fact that they can't look after themselves, they're not expected to. It's just that the requirement for the parent to do so is substantially in excess of what it might be if there was no condition. Until recently, they had the word normal put in that legislation, and it was pointed out to them that you can't call children with disability abnormal. They hadn't changed the wording of the legislation since the mid-90s. And it's the kind of things that one would expect a parent to do in any event, but where there is much more required. And it is all about time. It is all about time during the day, time in the evening, and time at night. So it very much depends on help that maybe a child has at home, help a child has at school, help a child has in the evening at their bedtime, and when the adults get woken up after the adult bedtime by the child at night. In other words, nighttime needs in this benefit are determined by when an adult is woken, not by when the child's nighttime begins, because they often begin much before our own. So it's about a 24-hour picture of a child's care, or a picture of what a child's mobility looks like. Quite often, evidentially, it's reports from a school that are being sought. So depending on where the child is educated, that might be an important cross-border consideration. Anyone experiencing any problems with child DLA or child DLA evidence being requested one side of the border from school, or issues with that? No.
Ryan,
Okay.
we have come across a few cases where the child's entitlement has been affected by a parent's cross-border employment.
Yeah.
And that's been, we've had a few of those that get very, very complicated, and it just ends up that they're kind of lumped in with the illness benefit competence then that the parent is under as well. So we would tend to push them towards then, very much encourage them to apply for domiciliary care. It's the only similar benefit that's on the southern side, but it's also a family benefit, not an illness benefit.
Yeah.
So we could end up potentially getting domiciliary care on the southern side, and possibly if there is scope, if there's significant care needed, maybe a mobility part of the Northern Ireland, that component in the Northern Ireland, so that's something to always watch out for, that we would tell people with cross-border.
From past experience, I have found that there seems to be a lot of competent state issues around child DLA.
Yeah.
Yeah, there really does seem to be an awful lot of those.
Yeah, it seems to be whenever there's one parent working and that employment is on the other side of the border.
Yeah.
That tends to be the crux of it. It took us a while to get it, to figure that bit out, but that seems to be the problem. So just a real red flag if anyone's approaching for advice. Thanks a million.
We also have, outside of disability benefits, we have a very modest provision for carers to potentially, on a non-national insurance contributions basis, but on a taxable basis, to receive a modest amount of money in something called carers allowance, if they are looking after someone who receives any of the disability benefits that we've just mentioned. But it doesn't work so well for most, because strangely it's called non-means tested, but if you receive any other benefits or you earn more than about 115, 120 pounds a week, you can't receive it. And most people are unable to survive on an income of less than 115 or 120 pounds a week. So it doesn't tend to work very well in terms of its financial gatekeeping. It will only work perhaps for some. It can increase other benefits like universal credit. It will add an extra amount of money to universal credit potentially, but it tends not to work very well for people in the modern age. Carers allowance doesn't work very well, particularly for those who are already earning or receiving other benefits. And outside of that, you also have to provide regular care for at least 35 hours a week for someone who is in receipt of disability benefits. So it's a very hard thing to get, and when you do manage to get it, it's just under £70 a week. So it doesn't tend to be a solution for most people. I'd advise NI for those who are entitled to social care, health and social care in the north. We tend to suggest that a better solution for carers is to consider direct payments from health and social care if you're a carer, because people who are carers are entitled to social services in the north, much like disabled people are, and can actually receive funding for their caring function. I have a question in the chat box from Gwen. Thank you, Gwen. When you, hi Ryan, is only the carer's income assessed, or does it include a partner's income too? Do you mean health and social care funding, just by the timing of your question, Gwen, or do you mean carer's allowance?
Sorry, I just mean the carers allowance, the 115, 120 income limit. Is it only the carers income, or is it a partner's income as well?
It's the carer's income.
Okay, so the partner could be working and earning more than that. Okay, thanks, Ryan.
But most people just don't find themselves entitled to this by virtue of their circumstances. It's hard to imagine a set of circumstances where someone can survive on so little money, but provide care and go and do stuff for 35 hours a week. Usually they're topped up by another benefit in order to do that. But the way that it works as an income replacement benefit is if you're getting those, you won't get the carers allowance.
Seems to be very much dependent on other supports, or, you know, if your circumstances, your family circumstances. If you had a partner who was on a high income, you could still possibly get it. But if you were caring alone, you wouldn't. Because you couldn't.
And then you've got the sort of jumping around and hopscotch of who's it for and what do they receive. And that's the last thing that I want to mention on this. Carers allowance often isn't a good idea for the overall picture, because some people who are being cared for, if their carer receives carers allowance, the disabled person themselves may lose out on entitlement too. The overall principle of UK benefits is if I have care needs and I don't have those realised by another person, I might receive additional money elsewhere. But if a carer comes on board and does that task for me, I'll stop getting some of my money and they'll get a little bit of that. Particularly for those who are still in receipt of old benefits, legacy system benefits that aren't a feature of universal credit. There's a notion of, if you like, additional money if I have care needs, but those aren't realised in what up here are called severe disability premiums. And quite often, if a carer comes on board, an individual loses extra money, and only a small amount of that goes to the carer. So great care and caution is required on that. If you have someone saying, I'd like to try and claim carers allowance in the north, I would say in most cases, it's either not going to happen or it might harm the cared for person. And our membership organizations will take you through that. In any of the board reasons, I'm sure, Jackie, you get the odd inquiry into the offices in Fermanagh about that sort of thing. And most people, I assume, are told, stop, don't do it. That's not going to work for you.
It really varies on the individual circumstances. You know, you've got, and when Gwen, when you asked, does the carers allowance depend on somebody's income? It doesn't depend on the partner's income. It doesn't depend on the partner's income, but it has we've got to look at the whole thing in the round as a whole to see what that person's circumstances are. For example, there might be other benefits in payment, and as Ryan has pointed out, those will be impacted. So you're looking at everything and anything. But yeah, it's not a great benefit, and people are really dismayed.
It's not.
Hear what the level of care that they're providing for the level of disability that a person has, the level of payment it's not, you know, it's not proportionate at all.
It's about
So it is.
£1.10 an hour, and we thought we were badly paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas there might be a more reasonable funding arrangement reached with our healthcare trusts for those who are entitled to health and social care in the north, by way of what they call a carers assessment and the direct provision of money rather than services as part of that. Carers allowance is just, yeah, there's too many cooks spoiling a very small amount of broth potentially with it. You have a carer that needs to under earn. You have a cared for person who might lose money if a carer gets it, and anything else that the carer might do in terms of claim benefits will have a knock-on effect on their caring entitlement. So it tends not to work for most, unfortunately. Okay. So we've moved through the working age system, and we will look, and we do have time, remarkably, to look at perhaps in brief terms the retiree system. But it's also worth mentioning that there are some one-off financial supports available that are unique to Northern Ireland that don't exist anywhere else in the UK. We have a finance support service, which is a replacement for our old social fund, which was a UK-wide system wedded to social security that provided grants and loans for people who found themselves in one-off situations of hardship. When the social fund across the entirety of the UK was disbanded in favour of local authority solutions, what that meant everywhere else across the water was councils got involved with individual funding. But here we kept it within our social security tent, if you like. But what we have is a financial support service that helps not just people in receipt of benefits, but people who are employed and earning up to £21,300 a year, whether single or part of a couple. And what that financial support service does with a phone call or an online application is it keeps an open mind on whether or not you might need one-off support for something on either a loan or grant basis. And depending on who you are, or whether or not you're in hardship or crisis, it will determine whether or not they will pay money to you as a grant or a loan. And this is the organization that takes care of our Universal Credit Contingency Fund payment. And the reason why that work has been given to them is because they are well trained in looking at people's budgets, their hardship, and what's coming in and out in a month, and making a decision as to whether or not they should be awarded money. So that's where the disconnect is, where people claim universal credit but don't go for a grant, for the contingency fund grant, because it's not universal credit's purview. It's discretionary support. And what it does essentially is provide help for living expenses, household items, travel expenses, rent in advance, and anything that helps people remain independently and safe and well within their home. And it makes a decision on grant or loan depending on how acute your circumstances are. It'll lend you up to £1,000 and it'll grant you money as required. There shouldn't be a ceiling on the grant, but there often is, just in terms of how much they're actually prepared to cover you for. It's what people use to help furnish homes. It's what people use to get important or essential items that affect their well-being. Or it's what people borrow for if those items don't affect their well-being, or they need help with rent in advance. It's modeled on our old social fund, and it has many of the same features of it, but it's just done in a different way, not just for people on benefits, but for those receiving an income up into £21,300. It used to just be a phone call, but it is now an online application. We recommend online applications because it's very hard to get through on the phone. But this is the place where people who are claiming universal credit and wish to obtain the contingency fund grant must come through. Universal credit won't be able to deal with their application. Most decisions are made in a day or two, and there is a review and appeal mechanism built into that as well. If it's a loan, not a grant, has to be paid back, usually within a year, but they can increase that to 78 weeks in exceptional circumstances, particularly where there may be other payments coming out. And it's usually taken either direct from benefits, or if someone's working via voluntary agreement, or attachment of earnings if they don't volunteer and they happen to not be in receipt of benefits. The clue's in the name, though. Discretionary support. What that means is it's not a legal entitlement, and that it's entirely based on the decision maker's view as to whether or not that money should be awarded to the individual in the circumstances that they've outlined. Think about it as a grant for things like white goods, furnishings, items that help people with daily living that aren't and can't be given out by healthcare. Emergency monies, your universal credit grant, or short-term help with budgeting on a loan basis, or help with rent in advance, but not a deposit on a private sector rental property. Things that people with limited amounts of income find difficult to get money for, they will look at on a grant or loan basis potentially. And also how we bridge the gap in universal credit for people uniquely here. Sometimes people are paid loans when they should be paid grants, and we have an appeal mechanism for that. Sometimes people aren't paid at all, and again we have a review and appeal mechanism for that. But I think at a cross-border level, it's enough to know that this exists, and it's important to look at where we have the need for it and the residence status and all the rest. But the key is discretionary. That's really the operable phrase here. And so there's a right of refusal. Any questions on that? Okay. So the next thing we're going to look at is entitlement for people beyond working age. Older people's entitlement. And perhaps the first place to start is to look at something called pension credit, and in particular pension guarantee credit, which is means tested, not based on contributions or their equivalent, nor is it taxable. And it's for those who have acquired state pension age and have an income below a level that a retiree is expected to live on, either as a single person or as part of a couple. Savings will have an impact on this, over 10,000. Will have a, if you like, a proportionate or pro rata impact on this. I'll not go into the specifics of that because you're not doing entitlement calculations, but it affects things a little bit. But the more savings you have, the more it nibbles away, perhaps until the award goes away. But in very basic terms, it says that if a single pensioner has less than £182 a week coming in from whatever their pensions are, pension credit might top that up. If that single pensioner happens to be on disability benefits, add 60 odd to that. And if they're a carer, another 38. So it just bolts on layers of entitlement. And there are larger figures for couples. So a pensioner couple with rights who have less than just under £280 a week coming in from their pensions and what have you, or there any income stream will have things topped up. There's also some other very useful things for pension credit to do. If someone's in receipt of it, they'll maybe get help with their rent. They'll maybe get help with mortgage interest charges up here if they have it. TV license up here if they want to pay it or want to be involved in that world. Money when cold weather payment, when cold weather hits, or indeed free dental, optical, or travel costs for our health service. So not only does it provide a top up, it provides some additional passported benefits too for some modest cost of living. And it will pay more to those who receive disability benefits and more to those who are carers. And this is one example of where caring and being a carer is actually useful, particularly older pension age couples who care for each other and perhaps both receive disability benefits will be entitled to the different layers of this. And the more layers that they're entitled to, the more money they'll receive and the more income tolerance they might have. So if their private pensions or occupational pensions are a bit larger, or if they have some savings, there's a buffer for that based on their circumstances. Overall, pension credit is a more generous income standard in favour of the claimant than the rest of the means tested system is for working age people. And it's on our list of exportable benefits. The one thing to be careful with pension credit though is age. In the UK, we had have had and have been experiencing over the years state pension age reform. We had ladies' retirement age of 60 and men at 65. That was equalised, and we're now together going from 65 through 68. So depending on your gender and when you turn certain ages, the threshold and age of entitlement for this might vary, but there's a pretty straightforward NI direct link where you can put in someone's gender, their date of birth, and it'll tell you exactly what their retirement age is if it hasn't already passed. Any questions on that? It's basically income support for pensioners, an income top up for pensioners, with a bit more built into the means test to allow for a pension to be in place, private pension or some savings, and extra money if you're sick or a carer or both.
Ryan, I'm just going to pop in the chat links to two briefing papers that Manus prepared for the project earlier in the year that focus on cross-border entitlement to pensions. Yeah. And they do highlight sometimes that there could be a negative knock-on effect for claiming cross-border pensions and potentially additional the pension credits and that because of, you know, if a couple, for example, are on other means tested benefits and whatever. Obviously, we're all supposed to claim, you know, everything we're supposed to claim. We're not supposed to turn down benefits, but just to be aware of some of the knock-on effects. So I'll just put that link.
Absolutely, but you know, we should also ensure that what we're doing is advantageous to us and works for our lives. You know, it works for our life, and I think that's important. Yeah. To make sure that we're not making mistakes. Like, for example, some people should claim carers allowance, but if they do, it might harm someone else, so then they don't want to do it. So, you know, it's important that we're pragmatic about that. Oh yes, I've read that. It's excellent. I didn't realize the author was in the room. That's great.
That's high praise indeed, Ryan, seeing as you done my money advice training. I was very impressed with it as well, so I will take that as the compliment. Thank you very, very much.
A good student. A good student isn't hard to teach. And I should say as well, you know, when it comes to older people's entitlement and those issues, we have an excellent resource in our members, AGNI up here in Northern Ireland, and I'm sure you're very familiar perhaps with their advice and advocacy team at AGNI, and they're particularly good on cross-border issues actually, because the person who runs their team is a cross-border worker. That's a proud cross-border worker, I should say. And a proud
Yeah, I
Donegal
know.
and a proud
I know,
Donegal woman called Brenda Kearns.
Yeah, they're excellent. AGNI is an excellent resource.
We'll have to reach out to them and see if they'll join us at some of the meetings.
Brenda Kearns at AGNI would absolutely recommend that. You know, Brenda's fantastic. A wealth of knowledge when it comes to older people's entitlements. Okay. The next thing that we're going to look at is, if you like, the equivalent of disability living allowance for those who have reached retirement age or state pension age or older, and it's called attendance allowance. It has perhaps the most confusing name of any benefit in the United Kingdom, in that attendance allowance sounds like either someone's attending to you or you're attending to somebody else. So lots of older people think it's a carer's benefit. It's not. Or lots of older people think that it's a benefit that you can only get if you have a carer. It's none of those things. It's basically a disability benefit for those who are over pension age. And just because you have needs doesn't mean that someone is coming in to help you realize those needs. It's simply based on whether you have functional problems with daily life. And if you do, you might be entitled. And it is based on the old system of habitual residence and past presence of only 6 months out of the year. But of course, we can use our common travel area rights to get around that. And it is simply for people who are not in residential care or in hospital, unless they're paying for those themselves, who are at home and are dealing with daily living challenges. Not means tested, doesn't harm, can only usually help benefits, isn't counted as money for other aspects of entitlement, and only has a care or daily living aspect of it, not a mobility aspect of it. And is paid at 2 rates, low rate and high rate, which often confuses older people, because if they're told they're getting a low rate of something, they feel and may suspect that they're being shortchanged. But it's a language problem. It doesn't describe the benefit award very well. Low rate is for quite frequent help throughout the day or night, and high rate is essentially for 24-hour help. And when you explain that to people, they tend to feel a bit more reassured that low doesn't really mean low. If you receive this and aren't in receipt of pension credit, it is a very good idea to check your entitlement to pension credit. If you've been refused pension credit in the past and become entitled to attendance allowance, you may find yourself capable of getting pension credit. Or if you're on pension credit and you get attendance allowance, your pension credit will rise significantly. And unlike PIP or what has happened to ESA, attendance allowance remains a better, smoother, and more claimant-focused benefit in terms of assessment. There are no third-party medical providers. It is all done in-house at the benefit. They tend to go for GP reports, and they tend to make decisions a lot quicker than PIP or Child DLA, for example, and they tend to make lifetime or indefinite awards. given the nature of the subject matter and who they're administering benefit for. But it is for these functional areas only and does not, unfortunately, include a mobility component. Mobility is relevant to the application, but only insofar as looking at how people mobilize around indoors rather than out of doors. Outside of that, the only benefits that I haven't included in this are things like bereavement benefits and industrial injuries benefits, simply because I could not possibly fit any more into the time that I had. But it is worth mentioning that we do have benefits for potentially people who have been bereaved on a short-term basis, funeral payments, or also those who have industrial injuries. There is a system of industrial injuries payments here, and those form part of an exportability treaty. I do think I did put a slide on it at the beginning, but it's just worth mentioning. But there had to be a point at which I had to just stop putting slides in here before Anne-Marie got completely sick of me. Important, obviously, to understand that I'm speaking to you from a network of about 71 advice centres up here in the north, all of whom can give very detailed advice in relation to entitlement, that we hope, it's our intention that you use this. It's one number into all of our services, and that we're here not just to advise your clients, but to advise you if you want that, and to help you navigate our system and have a look at entitlement. But what I wanted to do is just tune your eyes and ears to what's out there. But by way of quick recap, in terms of exportability, looking at your screen there, attendance allowance is exportable, CARES allowance for what it's worth, our disability benefits, when we're talking about the care component, and our contributions benefits, our state pension, and our child benefits are exportable. There are competent state issues with our old forms of legacy benefits, with our mobility-based benefits, and of course with pension credit as well. And that link that's in the chat box is really useful when it comes to the pension credit one. Also fully and highly recommend another look over the Law Centre's practice guide that was updated a few months back when it comes to exportability, and also looks beyond exportability at EEA national rights, EU rights as well. And they're important to mention too, that our means tested benefits and universal credit and pension credit come with rights of residence, depending on who you are. And not only can our members, but of course the Law Centre support you with those individual queries too, if the answers don't immediately spring out of the practice guide, which is excellent. But many hands make light work on all of this. You knowing about these things and tuning your eyes and ears to the entitlement of them, us helping with the applications, and then as things get difficult in individual cases, helping give advice, challenge decisions, pull up the necessary decision-making guidance, which we often have to do, and sort of remind the department what they're supposed to do. As frustrating as it all is, I think we've come to expect that we have to, as you said at the start, Anne-Marie, push back on competent state issues sometimes. Individual application is the issue here, because it's such a complex area of work, and individual decision makers sometimes make mistakes in interpretation that we all then have to go back and try and fix here.
That's brilliant, Ryan. Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop the recording now. Where do we see?